Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation about hyper-casual games, top hits, and then the tips to make hits for hyper-casual. So my name is Costantino Carrega. I am head of publishing for the hyper-casual department at Boombit. I joined quite recently, about a month ago, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about this topic. Try to give you my best advice in terms of hyper casual for the past, since I've been in the industry for about 2 years now. Yeah, hopefully it will be useful for you all. Okay. So yeah, a quick recap of Boombit and our journey to date. So Boombit was founded in 2014 and was mainly focused on free-to-play and hyper-casual already at the time, before hyper-casual was such a huge genre as it is today. Boombit went through a different genre of games. Some of the main titles you may know are, for example, Dancing Line, that was published with Cheetah Games. But then also more towards mid-core games with the games such as Tiny Gladiators and Build a Bridge. Then also other titles that you might be familiar with, such as Thanks a Lot and Idle Coffee Corp. In May 14th, 2019, Boombit debuted on the Warsaw Stock Exchange and so became a publicly listed company. And since there, the main focus of the company has been hyper-casual, with a strong focus starting in Q4 2019, and some already major hits that we've had in the past months, such as Ramp Car Jump, Witted Shred, or Slingshot Stunt Driver. So this is what our results so far is in terms of downloads. So very exciting numbers with 100 million hyper-casual downloads this year, including 35 million coming from Ramp Car Jump, which has been bringing us some incredible results so far. More recently, in 2020, in the past weeks, our game Slingshot Stunt Driver has been climbing the top charts as well, both on Android and iOS, with great results as well. And so yeah, so this is our, as mentioned, our focus right now, hyper-casual, and for sure you will be seeing a lot more games coming from us. So what I'd like to start with is the evolution of the hyper-casual market. So as you know, hyper-casual started a few years ago and was quite something completely new. So these games, very simple, that were able to scale so much, reach so many players with just something built on Unity potentially in a few hours. So what's the way the market evolved in the past, say 2-3 years since the genre really exploded, is for sure that the market has become hyper competitive. We used to have only a few publishers and a few developers focused on hyper-casual. Nowadays, we have a lot more. And though the market has increased in terms of players playing hyper-casual, the number of publishers has increased a lot more. So for sure, that's a characteristic of the market nowadays. And so this obviously, since it created more supply compared to the demand, has on average increased CPIs and lowered LTVs for hyper-casual games. So hyper-casual is still for sure a land of opportunities for great hits and great margins and profits, but obviously it has become more difficult today to make as much profit as it used to be at the time. At the same time, though, the market has been maturing quite a bit. There is more knowledge in terms of ideation for hyper-casual games, but as well, and especially for everything like game design and monetization. We now know how to monetize games on hyper-casual. Once we get good CPIs, there's good chances that we publish the game. So things have been evolving well in that sense. And for sure as well, the market has changed in the sense that there's less risk for developers. Hyper-casual used to be really like ventures that people would try a few games, a few prototypes, and hopefully just cross their fingers and get some hits. Now publishers especially are offering financially sustainable deals to developers so they can produce prototypes in the long run, and while hoping obviously to still get hits at the end of the day. hyper-casual as well is no longer just one type of game. So if you remember a few years ago, we used to have games such as Helix Jump, for example, which was just, one very simple ball bouncing on platforms, quite basic game. And that was hyper-casual at the time. It has now evolved quite a bit, and you can now divide hyper-casual as a genre in different subgenres as well. So you have, for example, ultra-casual or ASMR games that are oriented towards CPI, extremely low CPIs, but it's also difficult to get good LTV on this type of games as they are easily repetitive and don't have a lot of depth. Otherwise, other games that have been, and this is more of a recent trend, are, for example, role-play simulation games where obviously you would play real-life types of activities, but done as hyper-casual games, so ultra-simplified type of experience. And then obviously you still have action/arcade type of games that have been working since a while now and are still very strong and still working as always. Puzzle games as well in hyper-casual, so it's slightly different from casual type of puzzle games. They're usually easier in hyper-casual, but pretty much like the distinction you can make is that as soon as you need to use your brain a little bit in hyper-casual, it's a puzzle game basically. So that's for that. And then another thing that's been happening now a lot in the past months is audience or subject-based type of hyper-casual games. Some examples, for example, some of the games that we have been producing in Boombit, such as Slingshot Sundriver, Ramp Car Jump, but also other games that are, so these ones for Boombit, for example, are obviously more male-oriented, but also other games that are more female-oriented. So this tells us a lot as well about the hyper-casual market, considering that, as you may know, there is no targeting in hyper-casual pretty much. The number of users is huge, and even by not targeting the whole audience, but say only either males or females, that still keeps a great pool of users to be acquired and to be redirected towards hyper-casual games. So that was a bit the situation of how hyper-casual is today in terms of games that are being produced. But the question is like how to publish hit games today. So what's the secret to being able to publish games? So here's, first of all, I think it's really a matter of mindset and it's quite important in hyper-casual. So one first advice that I would give in general is like to be heartless. It's very important at this point because you need, in order to be a successful hyper-casual studio, to kill games often and fast. That's if you want to reach your hit game, that's something that you need to do. And unfortunately, this goes. It's not easy as well for people who have been working in the gaming industry in general. As you tend to get attached to the projects you've been working on. They kind of become a bit like a baby for you. So obviously it's not easy when you have an idea or something that you really like and the results are just not there to quickly kill it in the matter of a few hours or a day. So that's one very important thing, and the mindset to have in hyper-casual. It's not easy as it is still a creative industry. And it is difficult to just kill personal projects like this, but it's a very important point. Also, another very important thing, and I was mentioning it earlier, so there are more like financial sustainable deals for developers, and that obviously is very important in the sense that being paid for prototypes and being able to sustain a business and run everyday activity, day-to-day activities for the company is fundamental. And at the same time, hyper-casual publishing is a business of publishing games, right? It's not just about delivering prototypes or building prototypes. And that's very important to keep that in mind. Like being sustainable is one thing, but the end goal should always be to publish hit games. What I mean by that is like really hyper-casual is a great opportunity that developers have today. And passing on potentially publishing games is a bit of a shame. I mean, obviously, everyone wants to to publish games, but it's important to have that mindset constantly. Another one, and it kind of links back to what I was saying earlier about being heartless, is trusting the numbers before anything else. Obviously, hyper-casual sometimes is very unexpected. Some games that you might never think would be successful end up being very successful, and vice versa. So it's important to really trust the numbers, trust the data, and take decisions based on that. Another very important thing, and in hyper-casual, and this again might go a bit against the artistic, personal view of game creators, is that it's very important to validate the core mechanic and not necessarily build as award-winning art. So hyper-casual works with extremely simple art, such as colored stickmen running on very blank platforms. What's very important in hyper-casual is the concept itself, the gameplay. So it's important to focus on that, as if you build too much around it, not only is it time-consuming, but it's also a problem of eventually not hitting good CPIs, because if there's too much detail in your art, it's going to be considered more as casual mid-core games, and CPIs will increase. Finally, one very important aspect of working in hyper-casual is to always stay alert. Keep your eyes on the market, on the top charts, and on the trends. If you want to publish games that are relevant at a determined point in time, you need to know what's happening. Moving on to ideas. So it's kind of the order I would take, like in terms of producing your game. So you would start by having the right mindset, and then you need to think about the ideas, right? So first of all, why are ideas so important? Obviously, if you have a bad idea, no matter how much you work on it, it will always be a bad game. And this is very important because, as you know, hyper-casual is a business that relies on CPI a lot. I'm a believer as well in the idea that even though CPI is not perfect, you can work on LTV to make your game better. Thing is, still, hyper-casual is a genre whose profit is based on small margins. If your game can't scale, even if you make it profitable, the margin just doesn't make sense, right? Making 5 cents, like even less per download, is good if you can have it downloaded by thousands, millions of people. If not, it doesn't really make sense, and it's better to focus on other genres. So concerning ideas, I personally like to analyze them based on 3 attributes to consider a good hyper-casual idea. This is like the way I see it personally, but it can, like, this is just one framework, but it can be used in many others could work. So first of all, one thing that I think is very important to focus on is novelty, is innovation in the game. It's quite simple, actually. Like, as you know, hyper-casual games are being advertised either on apps where people are most of the time already playing other games, or on social media such as Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. What you want is something that catches the eye, right? And what more catches the eye than something unusual, something that has a wow effect, something that you haven't seen before. So this is a very strong and important aspect. If you work today on a copycat of a hyper-casual game that was published 6 months ago, it's just not going to work. People have seen that before. They're not going to click on your ads. So novelty, obviously, a very strong point. Otherwise, the second one I would say is simplicity. So it's a very, very important rule for hyper-casual. You need to understand very quickly what the game is about. There is what we call the 3 seconds rule. Basically, on average, users watch 3 seconds of your ads when scrolling their feed. If in those 3 seconds they don't understand what your game is about, they're not going to click on the ad. So you really need to make sure, like, you can even imagine a GIF of 2 or 3 seconds of your game, and people have to understand what the game is exactly from beginning to end. That's the way hyper-casual works, and that's the way you attract users. And obviously here I'm mentioning simplicity in terms of gameplay, or game mechanic, but it's also very important to have simplicity in terms of arts. If there's too much going on in 3 seconds, I'm not going to be able to tell exactly what's happening. If you keep it very simple, it's going to be very clear, straightforward, and users will get it. Finally, another important aspect is relatability. As you know, every type of user could be attracted by hyper-casual games. And so it's very important that whenever you decide to take a specific theme or a specific mechanic or specific art style, you should always think of something that works for everyone. So obviously, if I tell you real life setting, for example, everyone pretty much gets it, right? But if I start having something like, I don't know, say cyberpunk, my grandma is not going to get it. So this is important and always to keep in mind. Even though it might make your game very, very appealing for a part of the audience, if another part of it doesn't get it, CPI is going to go up. Moving on to the types of ideas. So as you know, like there's different directions you can take when building a prototype in hypercasual. So you can either go on a completely new concept, as mentioned, like just come up with something that hasn't been done before at all, either in art style or in mechanic, for example. I'll show you right after a couple of examples on that. I mean, the advantage with this one is that obviously you're innovating a lot in the market and you're a first mover. So no one else has done it before. You're going to have very low CPI. Your game is going to get a lot of traction. And on top of that, who knows, considering you're innovating, you might even end up being featured on the Play Store or on the App Store. So that for sure is good, but at the same time, it's very risky because when you go with something completely new, you have there's potentially you could work and be amazing CPI, and at the same time, it might just fail completely because it's unpredictable. Another one that's quite that's used a lot and that is a wise way of doing things while still keeping obviously the novelty factor that I was mentioning earlier. So you still should do something that hasn't been seen before, though you can combine things that have been used before. So what I mean by that, and hence blending mechanics. For example, if you take Cube Surfer from Voodoo that was published, I would say beginning of this year, if I'm not mistaken. That game, for example, is a mix of things that have been seen before, such as stacking with a square bird and swerving like in many other games. Thinking, for example, Skyroller even. In that case, they took two mechanics that worked before. They knew that they had good CPI and good retention. They combined them, and they came up with a completely new concept that had a lot more chances at working than a completely new one. So that's an interesting strategy to go with as well when brainstorming about game ideas. And finally, one thing that's happening as well quite a bit is better versions of top games. So here, obviously, we go kind of against the novelty rule that I was mentioning. But at the same time, the hyper-casual market sometimes is big enough to have more than one game on the same theme or same concept. So, for example, if we're talking about very like games that are ASMR, where the visual aspect is fundamental, in that case, for example, if you have the capabilities to make a better looking version, or if you have a better theme in mind for a similar concept, there is sometimes opportunity to just make a better version or a different one from what was already done by other publishers or other developers. So obviously this is like three different types of brainstormings you can have about hyper-casual ideas and the focus you should have. In my opinion, it's good to have a balance between the three. I would say only doing completely new stuff is risky because chances of getting hits are lower. At the same time, only doing blending mechanics is not going to be the best strategy either, because you're going to potentially miss on those hit games, like very big ones that you could have with a completely new concept. And same for the last one, the better versions. It is sometimes a good opportunity to do it, but many times it is a waste of time, as you will end up splitting the market with someone else who has a similar game. So finding the right balance between the three is ideal for a studio. Concerning inspiration for your hyper-casual games, there is obviously many places you can use to get ideas, right, and to start your brainstormings. Some of them obviously are social media like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook as well. Why? It's quite simple actually. If like I was telling before, that's where you advertise your games, right? So that's where your audience is. If you know what your audience looks at, you know what they like, and you know how to fit, like to match their taste with your own ideas. So that's a very important one. Otherwise, Steam, PlayStation Store, etc., very important as well. As you might have noticed, many games that are trending in more towards the mid-core, hardcore genre of games can also be simplified into a hyper-casual version. I'm thinking, for example, Fall Guys, that is a console game, but that has been adapted in hyper-casual in many ways and very successfully as well. Other sources that are not necessarily pure social media, but for example, Netflix or movies, they're very big trending topics. Everyone, watches them. I mean, it's quite simple. Look, for example, I don't know, Queen's Gambit, very, very successful series at the moment. Chess games are going up in the charts. So that's the way it works, basically. And finally, top charts, hyper-casual. So if you filter by top 3 games on the store, usually US is the most indicative one, you will find pretty much everything that's working. So that's always good to look at, especially when you're trying, for example, to blend mechanics, find new things out of things that exist already. Cool. Moving on to some trends, for example, since I was telling you guys before, something that is quite good at the moment is, for example, multi-mechanic games. So a compilation of different games with, for example, this one that we have here is a hyper school game where you will go from erasing blackboards to sorting things in chemistry class to throwing paper in the trash bin. Here's another example of current trends. Here, not really on the mechanic side, but rather on the art style side. So here you can see, for example, that we have a real world type of art style. A couple of examples here. One of them is Ramp Car Jump from our team at Boombit. But also other games from other publishers have been using this art style lately, and it's for sure an increasing trend. So once you have your idea, obviously you need to go in testing, right? And this is probably something you've been hearing about, CTR versus CPI testing. So many publishers have their, or studios have their own best techniques concerning this. So here, obviously, I will illustrate our vision on that. So CTR, as if you guys have used it before, is really good as a proof of concept or as an A/B testing tool. What I mean by that is that CTRs can give you an indication of the potential of your game, but they will never tell you exactly whether this game can be successful and profitable in the future. So it gives you a probability of a game being good or bad, but it's not going to give you a perfect answer. So this is, first of all, it's important to use it. For example, if you don't have a build and you cannot go to CPI straight away and it will take you time, you're just building something on Unity, you can quickly record Unity and do a CTR test, because it can just help you and guide you towards the direction, whether the concept you're working on is interesting and and users are attracted by it or not at all. And then A/B testing, because as you know, once you go for a CPI test, the conversion rate will have an impact on your CPI. So basically, if you have an ad, the store assets have to match. So the ASO of the game has to match what you're showing the ads. If that's not the case, your conversion will be hurt, and so will your CPI. So if, for example, if you're hesitating for your game, whether you want to go for a first-person camera or a third-person one, it's good to use CTR in that case, as it will help you find the best way to go with that game, and afterwards you can move right away to CPI. Though, in all other cases, we always suggest to go for CPI first and as soon as possible. CPI is the answer you need to know if your game can have success or not in the future. So it's really important to move there as soon as possible. And here again, aligning with what I was saying earlier concerning testing, you need to be able to kill your prototypes fast. In hyper-casual, false negatives, they hurt. So if you, for example, you kill a game that could have been successful, But false positives a lot more, as you know, when if you start working on games that don't have a future, you're going to put a lot of resources on them. You're going to also have a missed opportunity of working on other games. So for sure, it is important to kill games fast. Whenever you don't have your targeted results, you should kill. There's also always space to improve games, but you should also, as I was mentioned before, be heartless and kill games when they're not relevant enough. And just the same way, once you get a good CPI, you need to iterate the game very fast. The reason is, as you know, hypercasual is a hyper competitive industry. Whenever a good game appears on the store, there's good chances that people have their eyes on it. If you don't move fast for your game to be published as soon as possible, it's quite easy for competitors, publishers to copy your game. So it's either this part, which is obviously very annoying and everyone would rather avoid, but there's also the option where your game loses relevance. So if I'm, for example, making a game on a trending topic and 2 weeks later it's not as important anymore, good chances my CPI is going to increase. So yeah, again, you test the CPI and you have a good result. Cool, you move to iteration. In iteration, what is important since the beginning is to focus on the right things. There's plenty of stuff to be done on your game before it can be published, but you need to start and go in the right order. First of all, you need to focus on the first-time user experience. This is very important. If you want to to see the potential LTV of your game, you cannot afford to have a bad onboarding or lack of clarity when people start playing. So if people beginning the game and don't understand the concept, they'll drop right away and you're not going to have any relevant results. So then the second part obviously is the mechanic. You should really focus on making your game fun to play. You can have all the meta incentives you want in terms of daily rewards, weekly rewards, etc. If your game is not fun to play, people will just not play it. So that's for sure something you really need to focus on. And then finally, the core loop. The core loop is super important. You need to know what will motivate players in coming back, in taking what kind of reward they will get from winning, from losing, what's going to happen. This is very important because without a core loop, you don't have a game, and you especially don't have a profitable game. So those are the very important things to focus on. Again, an advice here again for iteration, you need to be very data oriented. You have your CPI, that's great, but then you want to make sure that everything you add is incremental and that you're not hurting anything that you've been working on before. So you should really work in baby steps to really keep track of everything that you're adding, to make sure that, like, if you add 3 things at the same time, 3 major things, and your game goes and your metrics go lower, you don't know which thing impacted it, right? So be careful to always add small things at a time to make sure you can tell what caused what and create correlations. And of course, a good way of doing that as well, and a much more efficient and faster way, is by A/B testing. Instead of doing 4 iterations on the same thing, you can do an A/B test of 4 different cohorts and you'll get your results. Yeah, obviously here, another very important aspect is the publisher's guidance. So depending on the publisher you work with, some will, for example, ourselves, we usually tend to help on the game design side once studios have hit a good CPI, before as well if we can, obviously, but that's when we get absolutely totally involved to help increase retention and everything else. Other publishers would rather wait that you have good CPI and retention before helping, for example. But yeah, obviously at this stage, and when you start working on monetization especially, it needs to be hand in hand with your publisher in order to make the game a publishable product. Yeah, so since we're talking about publishers, here's a couple of tips on choosing the right publishing deal. Different publishers have different offers that match different expectations and needs for different studios. So when you need to choose your publishing deal, it's very important that you take a few of these points into consideration. So first of all, whether you would like to have an exclusive deal or non-exclusive. This, for example, is quite important. Why? Because both of them have pros and cons. Exclusive deals are usually paid more, for example, because publishers know that you will be bringing your best ideas, all of your resources in one and only direction, helping the specific publisher, working together to publish games. Another advantage, for example, of exclusive deal is that by working exclusively with one publisher, you will be able to build very smooth communication processes together. Every time you will test another game, you will know exactly how to implement things. It will be faster and faster, more and more efficient, and you will know each other better and better. On the other side, the advantage of non-exclusive deals, obviously, is that you can be open to work with different publishers. If one publisher doesn't meet your expectations, you're allowed to work with other ones as well. And so that's also very important and can be part of your strategy as a studio to make sure to also keep your doors open to other publishers. Another important point is that hyper-casual deals should not only be about money, right? As I was mentioning before, we're in a business of publishing games, not only paying prototypes. Of course, this depends on the aspiration you have as a studio, but the tools and knowledge are extremely important as well in when deciding which publisher you want to work with. So you need to make sure you have the right type of help on game design, for example. You need to make sure that also the specific publisher has knowledge in UA and monetization, that they have a proper track record to show that. So that's very important things to take into consideration as well, especially if your goal is ultimately to publish games and not only deliver prototypes, obviously. Another important condition is obviously to read the contract. Words and definitions matter, and you need to be aware of what you're signing. So it's always important, for example, if you have some clauses concerning the prototypes, make sure that what a prototype is defined. Maybe for you, a prototype is a very simple build with just one level, two levels looping, and maybe your publisher will expect something way different. So it's important to always clarify all these type of things before signing a contract. And lastly, and maybe the most important point here, is to make sure that your priorities and your vision is aligned with your publisher. What we mean by that is that there's two main things that you can focus on as a publisher. So either you want to put hyper-casual games in the top charts for visibility, which is something that you might be interested in as a studio as well. You want to have a name, you want people to recognize you, but at the same time, being in the top charts obviously burns a lot of cash and is an expensive investment because, as you know, to have that number of downloads on a daily basis, you need to have to spend a lot of money in user acquisition. So that's one way, of course, of promoting your game, but it's likely also that sometimes some of the profit of your game has to be sacrificed for that. On the other side, obviously, you can aim more towards profitability. In that case, potentially your game is not going to be in the top 5, top 3 of the top charts, but at the same time, if the focus is on profit, that might be the best strategy, as the sweet spot of profit doesn't always necessarily stand in the first position of the top charts, but maybe sometimes in the 10th or the 20th. So that's a strong point as well. And obviously something else that needs to be added here in terms of priorities. Some publishers aim for multi-million-dollar profit for every game that they publish. Other ones not necessarily. So depending on your experience and on many other things, it's important to take that into account as well, because some of the games that you might be producing, some publishers would be happy to publish them, even if it just makes like $500, $500K, etc. But others, if they're not at least above the 2-3 million threshold, they're just not interested in publishing them. So that's something to take into account as well. So a few words about hypercasual and how us at Boombit see it in the future and how we think it's going to be evolving, especially in the next year for 2021. So there's going to be, so I was mentioning before that the market has become hyper competitive, but we're pretty confident that it's far from being completely finished, in the sense that it's still a young market. There's still a lot of opportunities. and more people will be joining. So there will be more developers, more publishers, so more competition, and also more mergers and acquisitions. So you probably heard about the Zynga Rollic one, but there's going to be a lot more to come. Some players, some of the biggest players will be dominating even more, with more games published, more profit, etc. And at the same time, a lot of smaller ones will be joining the party as well. So that's in terms of marketing competition in general, the overview. And in terms of how the genre will be evolving itself, it is a bit of a guess, obviously, difficult to say. A lot of people have been discussing the hybrid casual genre, which is, as you know, like a CPI that is close to hyper-casual standards, but LTV that is closer to what a casual game would be. So basically like the dream game, right? So very low CPI, but very high LTV as well. So many people have been calling Archero a hybrid casual game. In our opinion, Archero is slightly more towards casual arcade game, in the sense that the themes that are being used, for example, are, as you know, more like medieval, like Archer, etc., which is not familiar with hyper-casual, or not too much. The game per se is far from the hyper-casual codes. So what we think is that the actual hybrid casual that we might be reaching at some point, as you can see in this table here, this graph, is more of so hyper-casual games that are based on themes that are very classic hyper-casual, but that manage through meta and more things to get LTVs closer to casual games. So we'll see if the industry goes in that direction, but surely, considering how we're every year in hyper-casual accumulating more and more knowledge on the genre and how to monetize it, LTVs will surely increase. And as well, you're all aware of the IDFA situation and how games will most likely need to rely more on internal app purchases as well. I think also in terms of it's going to be a necessity for games to be able to rely more on that. So yeah, here was my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any question, I guess I'll be taking them right away. Feel free to ask any if you do. Okay, cool. So first question, do kill projects ever get another chance when trends are different? That's a very good question. And yes, for sure. I think it's must be. I'll be careful with my answer, in the sense that usually it's unlikely to happen. When a game usually gets killed, it's difficult that it comes back in trends afterwards. Facebook also has a bias towards new things coming, and when they come back, the algorithm recognizes it and doesn't necessarily want to promote it too much. Though sometimes some games really were out too soon or were not there at the right time. Let's take an example of, if you had a game that was about checking viruses in people and whether they were sick, say 2 years ago, and didn't work, well, with COVID, for example, very strong topic to build games on, might be worth a second try. So yeah, for sure. I mean, in some cases specifically, I think it makes a lot of sense. But if the game is very neutral and doesn't have anything that's really linked to news and trending topics, it's unlikely to happen. Second question, as an indie game dev, should I find a publisher before publishing my game, or first publish my game but risking that bigger companies can steal my idea? 100% you should find a publisher first before publishing, and for many reasons. The one you mentioned, getting your idea copied, is a big risk, obviously, but also because publishers can actually help you build your game in the best possible way. Many times, and ourselves at Boombit as well, we provide game ideas to our partners, and we discuss them before they come up with ideas, and we give feedback. So I think you have more chances of publishing a game ultimately if you work closely with publishers since the start. Taking the other one, could you tell us a bit more about publishing deals? What kind of financial terms are the most prevalent in the biz, either profit share or one-time payment? So publishing deals in general are structured this way, I would say. So first of all, for producing prototypes, the most widespread model right now is receiving like regular payments per month for a certain number of prototypes. The goal there is for, as I was mentioned before, for studios to be sustainable and be able to publish games on a regular basis, so to produce games on a regular basis and hopefully publish. So that's the first part of the deal. Then once the publisher believes the game can be published, the game can be published, and there's different terms that can be discussed. Out of those, you could have a minimum guarantee, for example. So that's something you can negotiate for sure. Rev share is quite important, where you will have some of the, I would say, worst rev share in the market are along the lines of 80-20% for the developers, and other studios will offer you 50-50 if you're lucky. So that's the kind of deals we can look for. Or other publishers as well, they offer fixed payments once the game is published. So for example, you can have deals based on payment per number of downloads. So if every million of downloads that you get, you can receive a 20K payment, for example, dollars. So that's for that one. When it comes to CTR tests, do you always select the broadest audience possible? The answer is yes, always. The goal with Hypercasual always is to just not target at all, because that's the way the business model works. If from the moment you start targeting, you're going to increase your CPIs a lot. Even though your CTR might not be relevant to 300 million people in the US, for example, that's where we usually test our CTRs. Still, it is better to not target, as otherwise you're just going to increase your CPI right away. So yeah, always broadest audience possible. So how do I do user acquisition for mobile? How much does it really cost to get 1 million downloads? Well, it depends on the game, obviously. So, I mean, the math is quite simple, right? You have CPI and you multiply it by the number of downloads, you get the price to acquire them. So if we're talking about Hypercasual, if you have a, say, 20-cent CPI, which is quite a good result, in order to reach 1 million downloads, you simply do $1 million divided by 5 to 200,000, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 200,000 in user acquisition as budget. Yeah, I hope this answers your question. I don't know if there are any other questions on the chat. Otherwise, I don't know exactly where I am with my timing. Okay, great. Well, if there's no other questions, then I thank you all for joining this presentation, and I hope to see you soon. Don't hesitate to contact me here. You can see either my email or through LinkedIn. Happy to have a chat, and have a good day.